Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Aiden, and I also go by Bluma as my artist name. And today I'm here to break down my song Get Movin, which is out on Spira Music. I had a lot of fun making this song, and there's a lot of elements in here that I don't really normally use in my process. So I thought it'd be a really fun one to break down, dive into the project file, and look at some of the things I used and some of the thinking that went into the making of the song. So, for those who haven't heard it, I'm just going to do a quick little listen so you can understand the idea of the song. And so, let's just do that quick. Yeah, so that's the gist of the song. It's a very percussion filled, kind of African tribal house song. It's super different, which is why I like it so much. There's a lot of uniqueness to it. So, yeah, let's just dive into some of the elements in this song. In most of my files, I like to put my kick and bass right at the top in a low end group. And there's a couple reasons for this. One of them being is I'm constantly playing around with things like the sidechain of my bass line and sometimes a little bit of the level of it as well. I'm just always keeping top of mind the relationship between these two things because in a song like this, it's more or less the thing that is making the song. So I like to keep them right at the top of my project file in a low end bus, which also allows me to use things like here we see in the bus is an auto filter, which lets me kill the sub frequencies in things like breaks where you don't really want a lot of sub frequencies coming through. So that's a big reason why I like to put the auto filter here on my low end bus. Diving into the kick though, we have this thing called a Walker kick, and I think it's because I stole it from a Kyle Walker song. It sounds a bit like this. It's this super full, punchy kick. And I was listening to a lot of his music at the time, and so found this kick, thought it sounded great. And you can see here I did a little bit of EQing. I think there must have just been a frequency I didn't like, which we can listen to in solo here. Yeah, so somehow that little frequency caught my ear. And so when I was mixing, I just took it out and had it sounding like that. So that's the main kick. I also had a top kick here, adding a little bit of high frequencies to the kick itself. And here that just adds like a bit of air in those higher like 1 to 10k frequencies in this case, more like 700 to 20,000 or whatever. But we can hear when we play these two together that we just have a super full punchy sound with a little bit of high end presence so that I can punch through the mix and even things like your phone. So that's why we have the two layers here. It's really important usually if you have two kicks that you want to make sure, in this case for the top kick, that there's no sub frequencies coming in. So yeah, we wouldn't want that sub there interacting with the sub of the main kick. And so by adding the low cut, we're getting rid of those unwanted sub frequencies. So playing them together, we get this nice full kick in the mix. In the group processing of the kick here, I don't usually do too much kick group processing, but it looks like in the mixing phase, I was just looking at the way the kick looked in the frequency spectrum using Span, which is a free plugin. Highly recommend it. It does exactly what you want to in a spectrum plugin, and it's free, so it's great. The utility here is not even doing anything, and looks like I have an imager here. Yeah, so in this song, for some reason I had a little bit of stereo image in my kick, and typically in house songs you want a kick that's really mono and driving the song itself. I don't want to say typically because there's no rules to making music in any sort of genre, but in this case I really wanted the kick to punch through in the middle of the mix, and I did that by removing the width from the two kicks itself. So if we bring this back to 0%, we can look at what it looked like before I processed it. Yeah, and you can see there's this weird stereo imaging going on, which I didn't want. And so when I brought the width down to minus 100%, we got it nice and in the middle of the mix, which is exactly what I wanted. So yeah, now let's move to the bass line. So the bass line is sounding like this. It's this nice subby bass line that in this song I wanted to be more of a feeling than heard, because there's a lot of elements going on in the mid-high and high frequencies of the song. So I wanted this to really be filling up the sub end and be more of like a bass line that you're feeling and you're kind of dancing along to, instead of being heard more clearly. So looking at the bass line itself, I made this bass line an operator, and maybe we can dive into the MIDI of the bass line first before the processing. So it's a pretty standard 1-bar loop, and then at the end of the 4-bar loop I have the note going. Yeah, it's starting just a little bit higher here. Do 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 do. And that's just a nice little variation to the 1-bar loop, which, you know, could maybe get boring with a bass line like this. So I just wanted to add a little bit of variation. Yeah, I always throw on the scale here just so I know what is supposed to be in key for my bass line. It's super helpful. I really like the feature they have here in Ableton. For someone who doesn't know as much music theory like me, it's really great. Yeah, we can also see here that I applied some groove to the bass line. So this is really important when you have a lot of, let's say in your drum elements, you have a pretty established groove from maybe a couple elements like a top loop and a shaker and things like that. In this case, I really wanted all the elements of my songs to be moving together. And to do this and make the bass line not sound super on the grid and digital, I added the groove of, it looks like the shaker here, in a bunch of different elements of the song, and I added it to the bass line as well. So if we take off the groove from that shaker, we can listen to what it sounds like. So it's hitting right on the start of each note here, which, you know, sometimes can work, but I like when the bass line it sounds a little swung, almost like a drunky sort of feel. That's what makes bass lines in this sort of genre sound really, really good and unique. So when you add that groove in, yeah, you can hear just a little bit of swing being added to the notes there, which is what helps kind of humanize the sound a bit, which is everything we're kind of looking for to add to a bass line that is made digitally. So yeah, that's the MIDI of the bass line. And next we can kind of go into the processing. So I made this in Operator like I mentioned, and I think it's just a saw wave. Yeah, I'm just using a saw wave and bass and Operator here. It is mostly being shaped by a couple of things here. So if we look at the filter on the bass line, we can see we have the frequencies brought back to 119 hertz. And this is because we want the lower end frequencies of the sound itself to be heard and not much of the highs. We want a little bit, but not too much. So if we bring the frequencies, what it would normally be by default, we get this really high, bright sound that, maybe could work for a synth or something, but for a bass line, we just want those low end frequencies. So if we bring it back to 119, we're getting all that low end subby stuff, which is what we want here. Another important thing that is being applied here is the envelope. And what this is allowing it to do is it's allowing that sub to still be there, but it's allowing for when the notes hit for the frequencies that are a little bit higher to kind of punch through and come through the sound as the notes are being played. So if we listen to it on 0% envelope here, you're just going to get that sub note, which is, not exactly what we want here. We want it to sound like it's opening up a little bit more. And so when we use the envelope and put it at the 24%, which I use it at, you can kind of hear it opening up as the notes are being played, which sounds great. Sometimes you can even go higher, but we didn't want it too bright. We wanted a little subbier, so yeah, 24% is what worked here. And another thing going on here is the decay of the sound. I have it at about 400 milliseconds, which makes the notes not too long. If I had the decay a little quicker, like let's say 2 seconds, you get these really long notes, which isn't what you want. Again, for a song like this, you want really snappy elements being built together. So yeah, when you bring the decay back, yeah, it just shortens those notes really nice, makes it all snappy. And that is how I made the bass line itself. And the next part, of course, is the processing. So something I like to do with a lot of my bass lines is separate the processing I'm doing by the sub and the rest of the bass line. So I typically don't like to touch my sub frequencies. I like to kind of leave them as is because Operator has really good sub in their synth. So yeah, you can see I'm just separating the sub here. Everything under 124 hertz is just going right into the last parts of the processing. But for the frequencies between 122 and 800 in this case, I'm doing specifically a little bit of saturating towards those frequencies. So if we listen to the low mids of the bass, yeah, so that's all the frequencies going on without the sub. So I wanted to process those by themselves. So what I'm doing here, like I mentioned, there's a little EQ in here. I'm doing a bit of saturator, a little bit of slight distortion from saturator and decapitator. So if we take off saturator, it sounds like that. Yeah, so you can hear the brightness it adds to the top end of the bass line. Sounds great. That's doing a lot of that work. And a lot of the time when I do saturate my bass lines, I try and get more than just one saturator, just to kind of evenly distribute the amount of work that's going on to the bass line. So we have that saturator here, but we also have decapitator, which looks like it's working pretty hard here. Decapitator is a great saturating distortion plugin. It works incredible on bass lines. It also works on your drum buses and vocals and synths. So this is a great one. I think it's like $40 normally, but sometimes they do like half off sales. So you can try to look for one of those. It's just a great plugin. Does exactly what you want it to do. And yeah, in this case, we have the mix at like 18%, and it's giving a little bit more brightness to the bass line. So if we take it off and we add it, yeah, we can just hear a little bit of brightness being added by the decapitator there. Looks like there's a couple other plugins. Yeah, so I didn't use this, but I think this wider plugin was here to look at expanding the stereo width of the top of the bass line, which I don't really normally do, but I guess I explored it just to see if it made any sense. And I don't think it did, which is why it's at 0%. So didn't use that, and didn't use the soothe here either. So you'll notice in a lot of my things, I don't really remove plugins as I go, which I probably should just to save my CPU, but I'll try a lot of things, and if I don't use them, I'll maybe leave them in for later. But in this case, we got a couple things not being used, which is okay. Like the drum bus here as well. And so yeah, we're out of the multiband processing, and now we're processing everything that's coming out of all the things we just went through as a whole. So now we're working with the sub and the rest of the bass together. And the first thing that's being used is the R bass here. And we can listen to R bass without and with. So if you're using headphones here, you're really going to notice the amount that it's helping with the sub bass here. And the reason for that is I have the frequency of R bass tuned to the root note of my bass line. So if we go into a EQ here, for example, we'll see in the 44 hertz. So if you look in the bottom left of the black square on the main screen, you can see that the root note, which is F0 of my bass line, is 44 hertz. And so when you tune R bass to that root note, it's really going to pull up the main part of your bass line in the sub range. So using R bass in this case really helps bring out the bass line and made it nice and full in the sub. So highly recommend checking it out. I think it's another one that's maybe 20 or $30. So will really help a lot with processing your bass lines. Yeah, it looks like there's an EQ doing pretty much nothing here. Then I have a limiter, which I don't normally use on my bass lines, but it looks like I was looking for a little bit more amplitude, a little bit more loudness here without sacrificing the mix too much. So again, FabFilter Pro L2, the FabFilter stuff, the presets are doing exactly what you want them to do. And I love that about Pro L. Soothe is very similar, where the names of the presets do exactly what you want. And that's pretty unique because there's a lot of different plugins that have presets that sound cool that don't do exactly, or don't do at all pretty much what you want them to, but Pro L and Soothe do exactly what you want. So I use this bass limiter 1 here, and I just put the output to the max dB that I wanted the bass line to be at. And so it just kind of hits the limiter just super lightly, not adding too much distortion, but doing what I want in terms of adding that gain. And yeah, I just have a couple last things here. Don't think I'm doing anything with these guys, no. And then of course just the side chain at the end of the chain. And just to look here at the side chain. So when you root something like Kickstart, a sidechain plugin, when you root the kick into the plugin itself, you can see the thing you're trying to sidechain it to. So in this case, it's the kick. I really like to visualize a lot of these things. So plugins like this help me with that a lot. And the sidechain here is just allowing the kick to punch through in the sub, and also the bass line to have its moment where it's taking up space, but only when the kick is not playing. So when the kick hits, we want the kick to be heard, and when the kick's not playing, we want the bass line to be heard. And that's what sidechaining helps you do. So yeah, I'm sidechaining it here 90%, pretty hard. And you know, that's never really a fixed number. That changes with every single type of song. And 90% is what worked here. So yeah, I think that's everything for the bass line. It looks like there's a couple other bass lines I tried out here. Yeah, just like with different processing. Yeah, that one does not sound good at all. But yeah, I ended up with this guy sounding exactly what I wanted. So yeah, I think that is it for the low end. So moving on is probably the next, I wouldn't say there's any order of most important here, but of course drums in a song like this are highly, highly important. And so maybe we can just listen quick to hear what those are sounding like. So lots going on, a lot of percussion, bongo hits going on. But let's dive into my process of this, some of the layering going on, and my thinking. So first thing we can look at is this main hat here. It's a very bright open hat with not too much transient and some good stereo width going on just to make the hat sound nice and full in your headphones. So our main element is an open hat. If we look closely, at this open hat, we can see I'm bringing down the fader of the open hat so that the sound doesn't actually last as long. If we remove that fader, we're gonna get this really long hi-hat, which we don't want in this case. We want really snappy drums for this song. So if we bring the fader back, we get that quick sound. And I'm also just killing some of the transient in that. A lot of my hat processing, I'm looking at the transient and the sustain and just making sure they all work together, because when you do a lot of layering with your drum elements, especially your hats, the transients add up and they can get pretty harsh. So making sure you're managing those things throughout your mixes is important for a song like this. So yeah, if we remove the transient designer, you get a pretty harsh transient. And if we add it back, you can hear it's just kind of taming that a little bit. And next we have another open hat. It's this like super bright textury sound going on. It is panned a little bit to the left. So thinking about stereo imaging in your drum elements is really important. When you're mixing, you always want to be thinking about, of course, about the frequency spectrum, about where things sit in accordance to other things in the frequency spectrum, but also in the stereo field. Because if you have everything going mono, everything's going to sound really messy, and there's not going to be a lot of room for things, even if you have the frequencies separated. But when you start using the stereo field and things like drums, you get them sounding really full, and they sound incredible when you listen to them in headphones. So I have this one, again, panned a little bit to the left with a little fader here just to make it not as long, like I mentioned before. We have a closed hat layer, which is helping a little bit of that transient there in the body of the hat. That one's panned to the left as well, so aiding to the stereo width. And then we have a noisy hat at the end. Yeah, which is kind of still a transient too. It's got some more textures in there as well. But just killing, it looks like everything below 1K on that one, because I just wasn't really part of the hat I needed was anything below that. And so yeah, when we listen to these things together, we get this nice and full hi-hat. It also looks like I did a bit of group processing here, and I don't do this too often, but sometimes when you have, let's say, 4 hi-hat layers like this song, it can be helpful to use things that declutter the load-up of frequencies. And so yeah, something that is really great for that is Soothe. I mentioned too, but they are a plugin where their presets do exactly what you want them to do. And so something like here, harsh hi-hat, where I had a harsh hi-hat, it works great in taming the frequencies I don't need from it. And so if we click the little delta button here at the bottom and we start listening again to the hat, we can hear what's being removed from the frequency through Soothe. So yeah, we're removing all these kind of harsher frequencies we don't need from the sound. And that's what the Soothe is doing there. Looks like we have another transient designer, adding a little bit more transient back in. So again, I like to kind of remove them and add them and remove them and add them just to make them fit the song. It looks like I made the main hat itself a little quicker by bringing down the sustain. And yeah, I have another Soothe in here even, and it's on, you can see I'll usually when I use these, I'll just bring up the mix up and down. And so I just took a tiny little bit off the hi-hat again. It's not doing a whole lot, but that was my mixing process for that hat. So yeah, that's the main hi-hat. And next we can go into the clap. Just a very standard kind of 909E clap here. Not too much going on. Similar to the hats, I like to pan parts of the claps and have the fullness and stereo width of the claps being prominent in my songs. So we have our first clap here, just this super digital clap that is doing a little bit of work, but it's not everything we need from the clap. So that's why if we only had that layer for the clap would not sound great. So that's why we have a couple more layers here. I'm adding a little bit of Soothe to that as well. I don't think that's even doing, yeah, like that's barely even audible. So a little bit of removing and a little bit of sustain there, bringing down the sustain, making it short. But I think, yeah, this clap here is the kind of meat and potatoes of the clap. You can hear a lot of the mid frequencies of the clap coming through this sample here. It's giving a lot of beef to the clap itself. And we're adding just a tiny little bit of reverb to that as well. You can hear without it, it sounds like that. And with it sounds like that. You can almost pretty much not hear it, but I'm always thinking about the space and width of these sounds as I'm making them. And I think probably at this point of the song, I thought the drums were sounding a little bit dry, so I wanted to add a little bit of reverb to the clap element. Yeah, next we have this super snarey layer to add to the clap. It's being panned pretty hard to the right, same with the last one, just to give it that width. And then we have one more clap coming down the middle. Yeah, just a pretty standard brighter clap. Punching through the middle, no panning going on. So when I play them together, get this nice full clap. It's filling up the stereo field a bit and also punching through in the mix. And in the group, I'm just killing the frequencies below 200. I don't want any sub-frequencies from pretty much any of my elements besides my kick and bass, because I don't want those elements to phase or there to be any interference between them. So being careful about any sub that's being left in your elements in your song is really important to make sure that your bass and kick are really driving. And yeah, let's go into the percussion because this is a big part of the song. It's going to sound a little bit like this. So that's a very conga bongo filled groove, which we hear throughout the entirety of the song. It's nice and full. It has a lot of call and response going on, and I'll just dive into some of that here. So it starts mostly with these, I want to say it's these three elements here. We have one bongo here, one there, and then another here. So if we solo these three bongos, it's going to sound something like this. Yeah, so these three elements here are playing at separate times so that they can each be heard when they're played. But once the sound is done playing, the next one kind of comes in. So that's the call and response that's going on in this percussion. So when we listen to it again, we can hear the orange starts, and then the yellow goes, and then the green one here goes after that. And a big reason why I make my drums in audio is so that I can visualize these things, because I really like to see where things are overlapping with each other or giving each other space. And by having your drums not in MIDI and in audio, it allows me to better understand these things going on, because sometimes my ears can't pick up everything. So visualizing is really helpful for me. So visualizing things like drum call and response is best done, at least for me personally, in audio. And I think this is a good example of that, where you can see these things are giving each other time to be played in a way where they can all be heard and there not to be too much overlap going on. Yeah. And so we add a couple of these other elements too, which are probably going to do a bit of overlap to each other, but that's only to accentuate certain parts of the groove itself. So yeah, we hear like this tumba, for example. That's going to hit right at the same time as this bongo. But it's bringing out that note that's being played, which is what I wanted. So yeah, you want the call and response to be allowing things to be heard, but also if there's certain parts of the groove that you want to bring out more, you can layer them using other certain sounds. And so that's most of the thinking going on here. We can look at some of the processing quick. I just have a little bit of reverb, just a splash of reverb on some of these. I wanted to give them a little bit of space so that, you know, it didn't sound like they were too dull and there wasn't any tail. So if we listen to this conga loop, for example, so that's got a splash of reverb. And if we take the reverb off, it just sounds really digital and stale. But when you add the reverb, yeah, it just sounds a bit more in the right space of everything else going on. Is there any other elements going on here? Yeah, just making sure as I go. Bongos have a lot of sub frequency, so I'm just making sure to cut the lows from them for the most part. You can see I'm doing it pretty generously though. So in this case, you can see where the low cut kind of ends past the sub frequency mark of 100. And you'll see that as well in the group processing on my percussion, but I want the part of the lower frequencies of these elements to come out, because it's going to help fill in the drums as a whole. Because without those elements, you know, you're going to have the bass line there, but you want some of those, in this case, lower frequencies to be filling up like the super low mids. And by giving it, you know, a little bit less harsh of a low cut in the track stage and also in the group stage, you can let these things come out more in the mix. So yeah, if we look too at the groove, I know I went over the call and response here, but there's one last thing I want to talk about quickly, and that is when you leave the 1 bar loop and go into a 4 bar loop. So if we do our loop here again, I want you to listen to right at the end of the 4 bar loop and listen for the fill that's going on. Yeah. So right at the end of that loop here, we have this big bongo fill going on. And pretty much what that does is it just keeps the groove itself interesting. The 1 bar loop itself, like I mentioned, and like you heard, there's some call and response going on that keeps it entertaining. But to bring the listener into the next part of the song and into the next part of the groove, it's nice to have these fills every, you know, 2 or 4 bars to keep it interesting. So I just have that bongo loop there. Again, a very generous low cut in the sub, and it looks like I'm putting it through a limiter here. And I think I'm just using this in this case to get the loudness I need out of it without sacrificing the mix of my percussion too much. And again, Pro L2 has great presets to do exactly what you want them to do. So using this transient extra here, I threw that on. Looks like I pushed it pretty hard, changed the output a bit, and it got it to catch the, yeah. So you can see it's working pretty hard on the bongo loop, or on the bongo fill. But in order to get the loudness out of that sound I wanted, Pro L2, any sort of limiter really is going to help you do that in a way that doesn't sacrifice your mix entirely. So great use of the Pro L2 presets there. And you know, if you're looking to bring things out like that, like those fills that have crazy high peaks, try using a limiter for those because it works great. Yeah, I think that's it for the percussion. It looks like I have a bit of auto filtering going on at some point. Let's see here. Yeah, it looks like I'm kind of filtering it, the percussion in at certain points. So if we listen to the third break here. Yeah, we're just slowly bringing in the frequencies instead of starting them super hard at the break. That can be really helpful for percussion elements and things that you want to keep the groove going in the breaks, but if you want to keep the chorus itself still entertaining, it can be good to kind of bring in a little bit of the frequencies of it, and then when the chorus hits, have it all hitting at once. So that was the logic in some of the auto filtering you can see going on in the frequencies of this. So yeah, that is the percussion. There's a little bit more percussion. I just have the shaker here, which is doing a lot of the groove work of the song, to be honest. Like if we listen to percussion without the shaker, even the hats and claps without it, once you add the shaker in, it's really when you get to start moving is when the shaker comes in. So in the shaker here, I just have a little bit of panning going on. I love to have my shakers kind of moving from ear to ear for the listener. So when you're listening to it in headphones, it sounds like this really full and unified sound. And how I'm doing that is using auto pan. So without auto pan, and it actually looks like I'm doing a little bit of panning here on the channel. So if I take that out and auto pan, it sounds like this. So it's still got a lot of groove, but it's coming right down the middle of the mix. But when I apply the pan and the auto pan, oh, sorry. So when I apply the two pan elements, you can kind of hear it going from ear to ear, which is exactly what I was going for here. And yeah, just a little bit more. I had a transient designer just taking a bit of the transient out of the shaker, and a little EQ removing the elements that I didn't need from the shaker. I only really needed the high elements for it, so I just took out some of the lower elements and was pretty happy with how that shaker was sounding. So last but not least for the drums is the top loops. These do a lot of work in songs like this where you have very, very full drums. And if we listen to them quickly, you can tell that the loudness of them is a little lower, but the amount of space they're taking up and filling in is really great for the drum loops as a whole, as it's doing a lot of work. So mostly here, I think I'm just doing, just killing more of the low frequencies. I have a little tiny sidechain going on here, and that's just to let the transient of the kick poke out a little bit more. Sometimes when you have no sidechain on your top loops, the high frequency of that kick that I was talking about before might not have space to cut through. So when you sidechain the top loops to the kick, it can help avoid that issue where, you know, maybe you can't hear that high frequency of the kick. So by doing this really lightly, you can see it's only like 47%, but it helps duck out of the way of the kick and gives it the space to punch through. So yeah, we can quickly look at the top loops here. You can see, yeah, for most of these top loops, it looks like what I'm doing is removing the groove that they already have in the sample itself. And I'm using the groove of the shaker here to bring the groove from every other element that's going on to the rest of, like, to these top loops as well. So to do that is a pretty important thing, in my opinion, when you're using top loops, because when you get these sample banks, you get these sample packs, the people that are making them usually apply groove to them already. And so when you throw, let's say, 3 or 4 top loops together, they're not going to sound great together because they all have these little tiny timing differences throughout the course of the sample. But when you do Command U, which quantizes the sample, and you apply the groove here, what you're doing is letting these elements work together in a way that is cohesive and doesn't bring into account any of that past groove that they were given to already. So definitely think about doing that when you're working with top loops, especially when you're working with more than one top loop, and it'll really help those drums sound more cohesive and unified, because you won't have all these clashing grooves going on. And yeah, I think that's everything for the top loops here. Just a little bit of that sidechain like I mentioned, and yeah. So that is the drums in their first groups, but of course there's group processing going on with the drums itself as well. And we can look quickly at what's going on here. So in my drum processing, I like to take the low frequencies out even again after I do all those little low cuts I had before. Sometimes, you know, I'll miss one or two and they will come through. And it's also, to be honest, like, you can usually not have to do it all in the tracks and just put it in the group if you're going to do the group processing. So take that into account if you're really looking at each track individually. Like, always think about the group processing going on. That's going to go on later. I like to cut out the low frequencies of my drums before I go into the compressor here. And that's just a personal thing. I don't think there's like a set rule on that. But my thinking usually is when the compressor is bringing the frequencies up of things that I don't want to be in there. So example, if I didn't do a cut before this and I put the compressor on, it would be increasing those subbier frequencies and lowering my highs, for example. And maybe that's not how I want it to operate. Maybe I want the compressor to be bringing the more of the mids up and less of the sub, and maybe not bringing the highs down so harshly. So I like to do that by doing a little low cut first, and then, you know, in this case, I added like a tiny little high boost, but that was just my thinking of why I put the EQ first. Yeah, there's also the whole reason for that is about this compressor here, which is one of my favorite compressors, is the glue compressor in Ableton. It is here with a really high attack, or a really long attack and a quick release to allow the transients of the drums to punch through, but also just to bring some of those elements a little closer together in loudness, and, you know, just brings them, for lack of better words, it glues them together. And just with a little bit of makeup gain for the things that it is bringing back down. We got some saturating going on as well. I showed you guys the captator before, but I use this all the time. These drum fattener tools, or yeah, the drum fattener presets are great. They have good presets in here as well. And we can see I just have it on like 9.5% mix. And it's not doing too much, like it's not getting into the red or anything. So it's doing a little bit of of the saturating work here. You can hear it adding some brightness to the drums itself. So it's definitely doing something, and I love the capacitor so much. It's so great. Drum bus here is also adding a little bit of saturating. It is pretty low percentages for everything. Like usually I have the drive a little higher and I'll bring back the dry wet. But my thinking here was I didn't want all the saturating to be done with the capitator. I wanted the drum bus to do a little bit. So looks like I started adding a little bit of drive and crunch and bringing the dry wet up, and probably just brought it back down to this 5% ish here, and was comfortable with that, not being too high. So without it, like you can almost not really hear what it's working on and doing here, but it's definitely there. And having little tiny bits of elements working together over time, like having 5% of the drum bus and 9% in the decapitator here, you won't always hear them individually, but together you'll hear the differences that they make. And that's a lot of my thinking going into drum processing with saturation and stuff. As well, every time after I saturate, I like to have a low cut. A lot of the time saturators add unwanted low end, and that's kind of like not my biggest fear, but I never want my kick and bass to be compromised. So making sure I get those frequencies out after is really important. So I take those out. Next we have Pro L2. Actually, next we have the auto filter here, which is just filtering my drums and some of the breaks. So if we listen here, yeah, so what it's doing there is I have the auto filter turning on right before going into the first break here. And the reason I have that is usually when I'm filtering my drums as a whole, I don't want the filter to be really obvious and cutting the drums too harshly, because I want it to be something that you're kind of hearing change over time, just so that none of the things are changing too drastically from one sequence to the next. So we can hear here again if we listen. Like the frequencies are slowly being turned down over time so that we can get a little bit more easily into the transition of the next sequence. And that's by having this little auto filter changing over time, instead of, maybe it went from, like, if it went like this, for example, like there's too big of a difference there, and you want to in this case, I wanted to walk the listener through understanding that the break is coming up. And so by doing this, you can kind of tell that something new is about to happen, which can be helpful for songs like this. So after the auto filter, I have Pro L2 on my drum bus, and I got this from watching a lot of those Disclosure streams during COVID. They usually had this at the end of their chain, and it really helped get some of that gain I needed in my drums without, again, compromising my mix with too many peaks and stuff. So yeah, Pro L2, these drum bus presets are great, and threw this on, and it just, it's not working maybe the hardest. It is, looks like a little bit actually, but it's catching those peaks, bringing the gain out of everything else as well, and doing exactly what I wanted to do, which is great, because making sure your drums are a focal point of a song like this there's nothing really more important than that. So yeah, at the end here, I just have span, probably just gauging the spectrum as I was mixing. And I have this thing called MSET, which is really great. So I talked a lot about stereo imaging in my drums there. And what MSET allows you to do is allows you to either mute the middle of the stereo width or the sides, so you can listen to them individually. So if we press mid mute here, we can listen to just what's going on the sides. So that is what's bringing the stereo width to the drums. Now we can also try muting the sides just to hear what's coming down the middle. Yeah, so that's just what's punching through the middle, and then when you play them together, yeah, that's where you get, and you can hear more clearly the stereo width going on in your drums. So I definitely recommend that one again too. MSED's a free plugin, same with Span, and they're both great for a lot of the mixing process, so definitely check them out. They're great. And yeah, so that's it for the drums. I don't think I'm missing anything there. I think the one last thing I want to add to the drums is right before a lot of my choruses here, I have just a fun little clap hit going on. And I like it a lot because it gets you excited for the drums that are about to happen. So if we listen to right before the chorus here, we can listen to what it sounds like just with it the way it is right now. Yeah, so you can hear what's going on there. We have this clap that's being played right before we go into the chorus. But if we take that clap out, it sounds like this. There's a lot of space there, and maybe it could be cool to have it at maybe one point throughout the song without the clap, but I thought this one clap hit right before the chorus really brings the listener in and gets them excited for the drums. So again, like if we look at the clap, it brings them right into the drums, and if you don't have it, there's a lot of space there. So I definitely would recommend trying out like a clap hit right before your chorus, or maybe even a hi-hat hit. Could be a percussion hit too, but in this case I thought the clap sounded great before the chorus, so I threw that in there. Yeah, so that's it for the drums, and we can get into this super cool tribal vocal now, which is one of the big elements of the song. So if we listen to the vocal, I'll probably just highlight the main tribal vocal here first. Yeah, so we got this crazy tribal vocal, like chanty tribal African vocal here, and I pretty much just spent like 45 minutes to an hour scrolling through YouTube, and I think the search was just like African tribal vocals or something, and I found a playlist, kind of scrolled through it a bit, and stumbled upon this one, and I thought it was great because there was a lot of variety going on. I of course don't really know what's being said, but there's a lot of I just thought really unique parts to this that there's these weird little textures in the background, and her voice is still really prominent, but those textures kind of fill in the back of it. So I thought it sounded great. So let's talk about how I process this. So the first thing was something called M auto pitch, and what this does is it is an auto tune and formant shifter that is, again, another great free plugin that can help things that are maybe a tiny little bit out of tune come back into tune and fit in your song. So if we try listening to the vocal without the auto tuner, it sounds like this. And so there's one little part in there that gets out of key, and I think it's right there. Yeah, it gets a little tiny bit out of key there. And so when I added the auto tuner here, it makes sure that the notes are in accordance with the scale of my song, which in this case is F minor. So it brought that into a place that worked with the song, which is exactly what I was looking for. And yeah, it's not that noticeable too, which is great. It's an auto pitcher instead of an auto tuner, which I think just makes it more subtle. So that's a great free plugin. Check that one out too. And yeah, so after that, again, I'm doing a little bit of subtractive and additive EQ here, just killing the lows as normal, bringing out some of the highs. And something that's a fun little tool I made is this background noise out little gate thing. So I pretty much just took a gate and gave it a threshold and floor, so that part of the sample that I didn't want to be heard in the song were removed from it. So if we take this background noise out here, you can hear there's a little bit more talking going on, which isn't really what I was going for. I wanted it mostly to be the vocal, but when we put this back in, it sounds a little bit like this. Yeah, so it's taking out part of the talking that I don't want. Yeah, and it's helping that cut out a little quicker because there's a bit of a tail of weird little gibberish that I didn't want in there. So yeah, it sounded really good with the gate here. Yeah, next here we have some soothe. It is just helping me clean up the sample once again. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of little bits of the sample that were imperfect. So things like soothe really help me clean up the sample. And so yeah, clicking the delta here, we can hear what it's taking out. It's taking out all these harsh frequencies that are kind of tough on the ears to help it sound a little more clear and just, yeah, taking out all those bits we don't need. I added some saturation after, which I was a little scared about because I knew there was so many bits of the vocal that were pretty harsh. So yeah, I added just a tiny little bit of saturating to the mids and the highs. And so without it, it sounds like this. And with it, yeah, you can hear it adding some air there, which is, it's actually not getting too bad in the frequencies, like it's not too harsh, so kept it in there. Sounded good. We have some soothe, which sometimes I like to add after adding saturation, especially in an example like this where I was even scared to add saturating in the first place because I thought it would sound really harsh on this already kind of harsh vocal. But soothe helps, save that when you're doing those things to take out those harsh frequencies you're adding. And yeah, soothe is throughout this entire project because it's great. Yeah, next here we have just a little bit of delay going on. So yeah, you can see a little bit of automating going on when the vocal's not playing, so that I can fill in the little end of the sample where there's no talking or singing going on. Yeah, so it has the little talking part being echoed there just to fill in the space. And it looks like I'm also automating the feedback. Oh yeah, that's more in the third break, but yeah, for the most part, I'm just automating the dry wet of it, and it just helps fill in the space. I also like to do it here, like when you're doing this last big break into the big final chorus. I like to really crank it around. It gets kind of crazy. In that example, it's really echoing hard. And yeah, it's like really building up in that last break there so that it can be this big build and then this big release for the final chorus. And yeah, it looks like it's just a little bit more going on for the the breaks and stuff. So Endless Smile is something I use for a lot of builds. It can just help build that tension and what you need. So here I just have a tiny little bit going on. And it just gives it a little bit more reverb and echo delay before it goes into the next sequence of the song. So that's usually where I like it, is in transition periods. I'm not really using it too heavy here, but, and yeah, there's also a little auto filter, doing a little bit of filtering of the vocal. It looks really subtle throughout this. Yeah, like I'm barely even using it, but again, just trying to bring out frequencies where you don't really need them at certain points of the song when you're doing transitions and stuff, and trying to keep it entertaining by not having the same vocal playing at the same time for the entirety of the song. So, and yeah, it looks like I'm doing a tiny bit of automating here too. Okay, not really. Just a weird little up and down there, but that's okay. Yeah, okay, so a next big part is this swell I have, which sounds a little bit like this. Yeah, so we have this big reverb swell, which helps introduce the vocal. And what I did was I took the first note of the vocal, I separated it, I threw a bunch of reverb on it, and then I resampled it, so I bounced it into audio. And then after that, I reversed it. So if we check the fader here, like we can see this is the reverse of that vocal. And then I just added a little bit more reverb on it after, just to give it a little bit of tail after it ends. Yeah, so that we can get introduced into this vocal. So when I play them together, yeah, the vocal just doesn't come out of nowhere. It helps us understand that the vocal is going to come without really understanding, which is nice. So yeah, so that's that little swell there. I found this cool call out, like loud chant thing just before the choruses, which I thought sounded great. It's this big, like, yeah, it almost sounds like a chant from the same song, but it's from a completely different sample pack, which I thought was great because they worked really well together. So yeah, that's going on right before the choruses. Sounds great. And I got a little bit more. So let's look at the Get Movin sample here. So I have
Get moving.
Yeah, if we listen to the second chorus here.
Get moving.
So yeah, of course that's the name of the song, Get Movin. I just found this one shot from, I think, Splice Again as well. Just a quick little new sample, new vocal sample to keep it interesting. And yeah, I'm killing the lows on it, a little bit of the low mids too. I got an R Vox going on it to bring out the parts of the vocal that I wanted and some of the parts of the vocal I didn't want as much. And that's helping a lot with that. I have the M auto pitch again, and in this case I'm using it for the formant shifter and not for the auto tuning. So if we take off the M auto pitch here, we're gonna hear this.
Get moving.
And that's what the normal sample sounded, and I didn't want it to be this high pitched, you know, it sounds pretty harsh, doesn't sound great. But when we turn on the auto pitch here and we use the formant shifter that they have here, and we just bring it down a bit, we can hear
Get moving.
it brings it down to an octave tone that I thought sounded great for it. So yeah, again, M auto pitch is awesome. It's got the formant shifter and a little bit of auto pitching, so check it out. It's free, it's awesome, and it is used throughout this project too. So a little bit of fresh air, just saturating, and a little bit of delay automating, it looks like, as well. Maybe not. Oh yeah. Yeah, so we can see that
Get moving.
we just have it going up at the end of the sample to give it some tail after it's played.
Get moving.
Yeah, just to give it that little echo at the end. And have that a couple times. Looks like I have a sample I didn't use here. We got one more vocal going on, and these two are actually they kind of have a call and response with each other, the Get Movin and this one. So
Get moving.
we got the Get Movin, and then we have this one. And those are kind of call and responding as well between the chorus. Yeah, and so for that, I just found this Sound of Blanc sample, which I'm sure you've heard before, but I wanted to find something to interact with that Get Movin. I thought this sounded great, so did a little bit more saturating on it. Not even pretty much anything, but mostly just added delay to it to give it tail, so that it filled in again where the parts where it's normally wouldn't play, it has a little bit of tail. And yeah, I think the last little vocal thing here is this granulator. Yeah. So we have it saying get down.
Get down.
And then we have that get down put into a granulator. So yeah, I threw that get down sample into a granulator, which pretty much loops it a bunch at different speeds. And you can change how quickly you want that speed to be. And so I put it into here, a little bit of EQing, looks like I boosted some 5K here. And then I threw a bunch of delay on it. I wanted it to sound kind of weird and trippy, so trying these delays out with it made that happen. So yeah, it already sounds a little glitchy, but when you add the delays that I added here, yeah, it just starts going from ear to ear and echoes weirdly, so I like that a lot for that one there. Yeah, I thought it added, no, I didn't think it added anything, but I didn't like the mids going on, added some highs, and yeah, that's what got that to there. Super cool sound. And then just the get down was another sample that was given some call and response in the vocals. So using M auto pitch again. I don't even think I'm really using it here, but
Get down. Get down.
yeah, it's not even really doing anything, but have it there and it's great.
Get down.
And yeah, some more delay on that as well. So that's the vocals. The vocal bus, you know, I'm just making sure there's no more sub coming in. I kind of just throw that on all my group processing to just ensure, again, nothing's interacting with that low end. And yeah, let's get into the second drop percussion here. It's not actually necessarily just for that second chorus. I have some of it in the pre-chorus here. But I just wanted to separate these percussion differently because I thought they kind of stood out from the rest of the percussion groove that was going on. And so I wanted to process them in kind of their own way together. So yeah, we can listen to the main parts of the percussion here. Yeah, so that's where it's the most prominent in the song, is in that second chorus. And I'll just dive in quickly to how I did these percussions. I honestly just found a really cool African percussion sample pack and worked on making sure they sounded together. And that mostly consisted, honestly, of throwing some reverb on them and a little bit of delay as well, and making sure I could get the loudness I needed out of them with the Pro L2 here. It looks like I also sidechained them as well in the chorus. Oops, sorry. Yeah, they're sidechained just a little bit because I don't want, again, the bongos to be interfering with the kick on the one of the song. So sidechained it a little bit so that the kick can still be the prominent thing. And yeah, let's quickly look at the processing. Killing the lows, again, I feel like I've said that a bunch of times now, but making sure I do that for especially things like bongos, which have a lot of low end, making sure I'm doing that throughout the the processing of those. Looks like I'm actually automating a little bit of the frequencies here. Well, this doesn't even seem that. Yeah, I started it right before the second break here. And so I'm just kind of slowly bringing in the lower frequencies into this sample so that when you get into the next part of the sequence, it's a little bit more full when you get in. Yeah, so I threw a standard clipper on here. There's some pretty crazy peaks going on with the samples, so I just wanted to make sure they weren't destroying my mix and they still sounded good. So standard clip helps with that. Just soft clips those really hard high frequencies and doesn't make it sound too distorted in this case, which is nice. Yeah, so taking off in the red those crazy peaks. Yeah, threw a little bit of reverb on it. Valhalla is great. I'll use it all the time. And transient of the bongo, of the, yeah, just this crazy stack thing here. And yeah, I think for the rest of them, there's not much going on. Maybe a little bit of EQing. Yeah, nothing crazy. But I threw a limiter on this, responding to that first one. Yeah, that was a little bit needed just because this first one's really loud, and so I wanted to get the same loudness out of this one. So using the limiter helped me get there without sacrificing the mix again. You can see in the orange there that it is getting maybe a little bit distorted, but you don't honestly really hear it in the mix, and so that's more what I was trying to do, is just make sure it wasn't heard versus seeing it. So I used the limiter here in a way that helped get these two closer together, and I was happy with it. So yeah, I think I quickly already said the group processing here, but just throwing a little bit of reverb and delay on the bus of these things, just so that they're in the same space and they sound the same. A lot of the samples are from the same pack, but I wanted to just make sure that the parts that were maybe a little different did still sound like they worked together with the other samples. So giving a little bit of reverb and delay, kind of glue here. I know it's weird to say glue with these types of elements, but when you put them in the same space like that, that essentially is doing that glue work and putting them together. Again, I have another limiter here, just making sure the loudness of these elements is where I want it to be. All the transient still worked, so having that transient extra preset does a lot of that. It's just super, super great. And yeah, again, just a little sidechain like I mentioned. So yeah, so let's go into the effects and hear what these are sounding like. Throughout the most of the song, you know, we have a little ambience going on, just super subtle, but that's what it sounds like when it's loud. And when you turn it down, it's just a little bit of space being filled in through, you know, this kind of weird talking almost. And you'll see that in a lot of people's music, and I like to do that a lot. Sometimes I'll throw in vinyl, sometimes it'll be nature sounds or whatever, but in this case it was like more of like a market. It almost sounds like an intersection or something. I don't know. Yeah, and then little crashes throughout. So a lot of these are right when a new a new break is happening or a new chorus. I like to have these kind of introducing things, or, you know, halfway through an element, whatever it is. The 909 crashes are great for that. Keeps it interesting, keeps it fun. And yeah, I'm mostly just going to talk here about the last build FX. So if we listen to the third break here, we can hear that there's a lot of effects going on. So I'll just play it quick. Yeah, so there's a lot of things building up the tension there. And I wanted to make them kind of subtle, but I also kind of wanted to have some fun with it. So I'll quickly dive into what I did. Yeah, first thing we have is this kind of synthesizer. It's pretty tucked back there, so you don't really hear all this when it's in the context with the mix, but definitely adds a lot of texture. We have a little cymbal sweep. So just kind of a reverse cymbal crash. And the really fun one was this cool effects thing here. So I found a preset in Omnisphere, this sweep thing, but I kind of wanted to change it a little bit. And I'll show you what I did to do that. So if we look at the pitch bend of the sample here, and we listen to what it sounds like. So it sweeps down, and then it starts sweeping up again. And you can hear it rise. And then it's almost like a scratch back or something at the end. And I'm doing that here by raising the pitch of the sound and then pulling it back pretty quick so that it sounds like it's like being spun back or something on DJ decks. So that was a fun little thing I did there. Just making sure with doing things like that there's no crazy frequencies going on. So kind of containing that sound a bit with the EQ in. And I also got this little effects here as well. Yeah, so that's a great one too. That's, I think, just straight from Omnisphere as well. Just a tape riser, does a lot, and you know, helps make that transition into the final chorus really fun. Yeah, so that's the effects, more or less. Yeah, not too much effects going on. I don't like to go too heavy with them. Just kind of have them where needed. So yeah. Okay, so let's go into the instruments here. We have a saxophone. We have two saxophones and a trumpet. And so if we listen to the saxophone quick, that's how it sounds in the first chorus. And the third chorus. Yeah, so in the first chorus, I just have a bit of it, and then I have it responding. But then in the first one, yeah. In the first one's just a little bit of the sample. The third chorus is the entire sample itself. And I just wanted to kind of tame that saxophone here to make it fit. And the thing that's really doing that for this is this Ableton amp saturator. And I cannot say this enough, that this probably is one of my most favorite and probably the most underrated, in my opinion, Ableton plugin. We can just listen to what it's doing. It's adding so much to the brightness and character of the sound. And without it, the saxophone definitely wouldn't work in the context of the song at all. So if we take it out, if we take out that amp, it sounds like this. It sounds good, but there's not enough brightness to it. And when you add the amp in, it does a lot. Like, it adds a lot of those higher frequencies in. And when you do that with the decapitator, yeah, it just adds all the brightness you need to make it work in the song. A little bit of reverb going on, just a little tiny hall. Bit of EQing, taking out some of the mid frequencies, and then just making sure it's sidechained as well. Because when you have these leads, you want to make sure, again, that they have some groove and they have some movement to the rest of the song. And to do that, you can use Kickstart or just sidechain it however you want. So yeah, and then lastly, we have another little saxophone, which only happens right at the end of the third chorus. And it's just supposed to kind of finish off all that crazy saxophoneness and get us out of that part into the outro. And yeah, that's going right into the group processing too, so that this saxophone and that saxophone are in the same space and sounding good together. And yeah, that's how that is sounding there. I think quickly too, I'll just do the trumpets. So we have the trumpets really doing some work in that third break. Another just great sample I found. I had a friend who asked me about these instruments, and I think he even asked like if I got someone to play these and for me to track them, but I just found these again just digging through Splice, I think. So there's good things you can find on Splice. I'd definitely use it less, but if you do some digging, there's good things you can find on there, I promise. So yeah, if we listen to this again, we can hear so closer to the end there, we can hear the frequencies being let in. We don't want to give too many of the frequencies in the main part of the break. We just want to filter it in with the auto filters. So great tool there for the transition. A little bit of OTT being used. Again, some more reverb and endless smile, which I don't even know if it's doing that much. It's actually doing a pretty good amount here. You can hear it get pretty faded out near the end of the... Yeah, so like right at the peak there, you can hear it get pretty reverbed and delayed. And most of that's being done with Endless Smile, so that's doing some great work there. Okay, so those are the instruments. Yeah, next we can, or I guess almost last thing is this breakbeat here. This, I was trying to find a good place to have this throughout the song, so you can see I kind of tried checking it out in the first break, but it didn't really work. It made a lot of sense here though in the last part of the third break here. And if we listen to it on its own, it sounds it doesn't sound great. It sounds a little corny. It's like this marching band breakbeat. But when you put it in the context of the song, it makes a lot more sense. So I would say for when you're looking through samples, it's good to like them on their own, but the more important part is making sure it works in the context of the song. So I thought it worked here, and that's why I used it. So yeah, I'm just killing the lows on that too. Not too much. A little bit of frequency filtering in here. And I also sidechained it to the kick because near the third chorus, we have the kicks coming in, so I didn't want those to be interacting too much. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I think maybe I can do the mastering quick. Oh yeah, just quickly, I also use the sends a lot with things like my vocals. So if we look at the tribal vocal here, we can see the sends are being used. And in this case, in the tribal vocal, we're using a little vocal plate, the delay, and a vocal hall. So if we listen to this tribal vocal without these things, it's going to sound like this. And it sounds good, but there's not enough space being put into it, in my opinion. So when you add those things back in through the sends, it sounds like this. Yeah, and that way it's given a lot more space, delay, reverb, and it sounds a lot better in my opinion. So I kind of use these through sends for the most part. It's just a bit of a easier workflow for me. I don't always do this, but it's currently in my default template is using these guys. So try giving them a go, because I know less people use sends than they used to back in the day, but I'm enjoying using them, and they're pretty good for workflow process, in my opinion. So yeah, I guess the last part here is the mastering chain. Not too much going on here, and for the actual song, we did another master, like Spira sent it to their mastering guys, so we didn't even use my self master, but we can quickly dive in here. Like, I have an EQ to start here, which I actually don't really recommend. I recommend if there's elements or frequencies that are lacking in your song to go back into the mix and fix them before. But here I just added a little bit to the like 700 hertz. Just probably something, I could have gone back into the drum bus and fixed those directly, because I'm sure that the thing I was looking for was a little bit more clap or percussion or something. So try and fix these things in the mix before you do them in the master is my recommendation, so that you make sure you're bringing out exactly what you want to bring out. The one thing I normally do with an EQ though is there's a little tiny high boost here. Sometimes I'll do a little sub boost here, just to make sure those two are the most prominent parts of my mix. I have a little thing catching the peaks here. So the quick attack and release of this compressor is just making sure that those super high peaks are being caught before entering the rest of the mastering chain. I have another little kind of clipper here going on. It's just doing an analog clip with the Ableton saturator. You can see like the drive and the output are with a little bit of drive and bringing back the output a bit. It's more acting as a clipper than anything. Compressor here. We are just kind of smoothing out the entirety of the song and making sure that there's not any, again, crazy loudness differences between all the elements. And the main part of, not the main part, but something that I definitely look at a lot in my mastering, in my self-masters, is the image of my elements. So Ozone 11 Imager, at least the multi-band version here, is not free. It is paid for. I paid for it through the Ozone Advanced, but the thing you can do here is you can check out each band. So let's say you wanted to just look at your super highs, like 7 to 20,000 hertz. You can look at the stereo width of your song compared to usually like a reference track, and you can see where those things compare to one another. So I like to do this a lot in the end of my mastering chain, just to make sure that the stereo width of the things in my song are matching what is the stereo width of a professional song or song that I like or something like that. So I definitely recommend checking this one out. It's a little more expensive, I think, but it does a lot of work, and it actually does make a pretty noticeable difference in your mixes, in your masters. So definitely check that one out. And yeah, I think just the last thing here is some Pro L2. Pretty typical to see this at the end of a mastering chain, but this is going to give it the loudness you want when you're sending off your demos and stuff. I love Pro L2. I've said it probably a couple times in this video already, but they're presets I use sometimes. Sometimes I don't, and I just mess with the settings. But yeah, just making sure I can get my song to the lefts I need it here. I want to get like between -6 and -8 is mainly my goal with Pro L2. So yeah, at the end of my chain, it's doing a lot of work here and bringing that gain. And yeah, I think that is just about everything. If I missed anything, please let me know. And I'm sure there's a couple things I skipped through or went on a tangent about or something, but please drop a comment or shoot me a message if there's anything you want me to talk more about. I'd love to hear what you guys are curious about, or if you want to hear another sort of breakdown, I'd love to do one of those as well. So yeah, make sure to drop a comment and shoot me a message if you have any other specific questions. And yeah, besides that, thanks for watching, guys. Hoping to do more of these in the future. So yeah, let me know if you like it, and yeah, have a good one.